Hey guys, my name is Trevor Sullivan. I'm a solutions architect with StratusGrid, and welcome back to our video channel. Thanks so much for joining us for another AWS focused video. The topic for today's video is going to be around a relatively new feature. This is currently reInvent week. It's the first week of December in 2024. So there's a lot of exciting things happening out at AWS reInvent. Some of my colleagues are actually present there at the event, and there are a lot of new exciting announcements about new features and new capabilities that are being added to the AWS cloud platform. And I just happened across one of those in the last 24 hours or so. And one of those features is called Allowed AMIs. And I was really interested in what this feature was. It sounded like some kind of policy engine that allows you to kind of limit which AMIs are quite literally allowed in your environment. So I did a little bit of research on it and wanted to share some in-depth knowledge with you on how that feature actually works and actually show it to you in action. I don't want to just talk about it. I want to make sure that you actually understand what that feature looks like in the console, how to find it, and then how to actually configure that feature so that you can limit your AMIs and keep your environment secured. Now, before we talk about that, I just wanted to briefly introduce StratusGrid. So StratusGrid is an AWS Premier Consulting partner. We also are an independent software vendor, or ISV. We have a software product called Stratosphere. Feel free to head out to our website at stratusgrid.com if you're interested in learning more about Stratosphere, or if you are in need of cloud engineering services to help architect solutions on Amazon Web Services, or maybe migrate some workloads from on-premises up into the cloud, or maybe migrate off of a different cloud vendor into AWS. We are more than well equipped to help you through all those different types of efforts. And as a solutions architect, I actually work on the sales team at StratusGrid, so you can interact with me and our sales team in order to help find the right solution for your project. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the allowed AMIs feature. So one of the things I like to do from time to time is kind of keep up to date with some of the newest features in AWS. And as I mentioned, this is a new announcement that I just came across in the last 24 hours or so because it's reInvent week and there's a lot of new stuff going on. So if you head out to Google and just say, "What's new AWS?" That'll take you to this landing page right here that I just had open called What's New with AWS. And what this is it's basically a huge list over many, many years, well over a decade at this point, of all of the new feature announcements that have been released at AWS. So anytime that a new EC2 instance type is released, or if a new Lambda function capability is released, or if Step Functions comes out with a new feature, all of those different types of announcements, even things like rollouts, where they're progressively rolling out a particular EC2 instance type, maybe starting with 3 regions, then they expand 3 more regions. So every time that they do an additional rollout, they add a feature announcement to say, hey, this instance type is now available in these 3 new regions. Or anytime that a brand new region comes online, those are types of feature announcements that you can find in here. So this is a great place to just kind of figure out like what's new in AWS, what are the latest and greatest features that I can take advantage of as I'm building my architectures in AWS. And if you just scroll down a little bit here, you'll see this what's new feed. And so this is a chronological list of all the different features that have been released here. And you can actually just filter by keyword right here. So if you're looking for something around step functions, you could just search for step maybe and hit enter. And, there's going to be a lot of other stuff kind of mixed into here as well. But, here's one on step functions that was announced back in November, just a week or two ago. And so what we're looking for is this allowed AMIs feature. And I actually keep tabs on this feed. So our company Slack has a channel that we can just kind of keep up to date with all the new announcements that come out. So that's a really nice way for us to integrate with Slack and just very easily be able to consume this feed without actually having to go out to this web page. So you might want to set up some kind of integration like that with your environment as well. So if you do a search for AMI, you'll see that on December 1st of 2024, that was yesterday as of this recording, there is the EC2 new feature called Allowed AMIs to enhance AMI governance. Now, in larger organizations, if you're a large company, a large enterprise, or if maybe you're a private equity firm and you're looking to improve security and governance controls and cost optimization across your entire environment, governance is actually a huge topic, right? Because anybody can go out and sign up for an AWS account and just start building stuff inside of there. But what ends up happening over a long period of time, over months and years, is that a lot of cruft starts to build up inside of AWS. So you kind of start to forget what you've actually deployed in the AWS environment. Now, from a development sandbox perspective, that's totally fine. But when you're dealing with production environments, that's where things start to get a little bit messy. And you really want to have a clean production environment. You want to have a clean staging environment so that as you progress through your pipelines, you have a predictable outcome when you move your applications from development to stage, QA, production, and make sure that the code is going to act the same across all those environments. Also, when you start to have cruft laying around inside of your cloud accounts, what can happen is that can create unexpected security holes. So if somebody goes out and creates an S3 bucket and just kind of forgets about it and sticks some sensitive data in there, and for some reason they decide to set it to public, well, guess what? That data could potentially be discovered by a creative malicious user that is running some kind of script to hammer a bunch of different S3 buckets, trying to look for any S3 buckets that are open to the public, right? And so having governance controls in place to ensure that S3 buckets are locked down, to ensure that we're only launching EC2 instances from approved AMIs, Amazon Machine Images, and things of that nature. There's lots of different types of rules that you might want to implement just to keep a good handle on your environment. That not only improves your security posture, but it also improves cost as well, because if you have those controls in place, it's going to prevent people from just going out and doing one-off deployments in your environment. If you're using infrastructure as code practices, if you have pipelines set up to automate, if you're doing peer reviews, anytime somebody checks in changes to a microservice or infrastructure as code, those are all great things that you can do to improve the security posture, but also ensure that you're not paying for extra resources that aren't actually needed in some of your AWS environments. And Stratosphere actually helps you to identify some of those things as well. But especially when it comes to those production environments, that's where it gets really a little bit more hairy. But anyways, allowed AMIs is a new feature in EC2 that allows you to control which AMIs are allowed to be launched. Basically, which accounts, which AWS accounts am I authorizing my account to launch EC2 AMIs from, EC2 instances from AMIs, right? So as you may know, you can actually share AMIs from one AWS account to another AWS account. And in larger organizations, oftentimes what you'll have is a kind of centralized security account where you do things like logging and security controls. Maybe you've got firewall rules, you've got guard duty set up kind of centrally. You've got AWS config rules that are set up centrally to enforce compliance on resource configurations and things of that nature. And so what you might have in a security account is actually a list of AMIs that are up to date. They've got the latest security patches installed. They're configured with all of your organizational policies. If there's certain agents that have to be installed just by policy, maybe those are pre-installed into those Amazon machine images. There's a lot of different things that you might want to kind of package up into an AMI, and you can actually use the EC2 image builder service to automate the build process of your AMIs for you. You can also use all sorts of pipelines. You can use tools like Packer from HashiCorp. It's an open source tool that helps you to automate and streamline the process of building out your AMIs in EC2. But then what you can do is build those AMIs in that centralized account, and you can simply share those AMIs with all of the other accounts in your organization that are actually deploying workloads. So if you're deploying Kubernetes clusters, if you're deploying standalone EC2 instances, things of that nature, you can just take those images from that centralized account rather than having each DevOps team that owns different accounts in your organization from having to build their own custom images, right? It just allows you to kind of centralize the security policy controls, and it also makes everybody else more efficient because they don't have to worry about that custom AMI build. But what we are actually doing here is not necessarily sharing the AMI. What we're actually doing is we're limiting or preventing certain accounts from having AMIs be visible to our account. So what you might want to do, for example, is say, hey, Amazon has lots of default images. If you go out to the EC2 console over here, and you take a look at the AMIs that are available right here, or even if you just go to the launch instances screen, there's a lot of what they call quick start images available. And if you take a look at, let's see, launch instances, let me actually switch to a different account because I think I have the policy enabled that's limiting me from seeing things. But if I go to launch instance, under application and OS images right here, you can see we've got the standard Amazon provided Ubuntu, Amazon provided Windows images, Red Hat images, all those types of things, right? Amazon Linux, Mac OS, which is supported on a limited set of systems as well. There's a lot of different images that are provided out of the box here, but you might want to prevent users in your organization, at least in like production and staging accounts, maybe development sandboxes, you want to allow the use of these for kind of building and testing and that kind of thing. But as far as those staging and production environments go, you want to have a reliable, secure environment. And so you might say, hey, I only want these production accounts to be able to launch instances from the images that are provided or shared out through this centralized account. And so the new allowed AMIs feature allows us to do exactly that. So what I've got here is two different accounts, right? So I'm signed in as this account right here that starts with 6546, and then I'm signed into another account right here called 9730, or it starts with a 9730. So those are the two different accounts that I'm going to be working with here. They're all part of the same kind of structure here, but I'm just going to kind of pretend like these are two standalone accounts, more or less, not necessarily part of AWS organizations at this point. And so what we're going to do is actually create an image in the one account here. We're going to share that image with our other account, and of course it'll be visible, but then we're actually going to take a look at how to implement this little JSON policy blob for the allowed AMIs feature to actually prevent any other images besides the images that are shared from this one centralized security account, we're going to pretend it is, from being launched on EC2 instances. So before I do that, I just want to kind of reset things back to the default view. I'm going to go over here and actually just disable this feature back to the default. By default, it'll just be disabled. You'll actually have to come in here and enable it. So we'll get into that in just a moment here. But what I would encourage you to do is actually read the documentation for this feature. So it's actually pretty comprehensive documentation. Once you find this news article or publication here that talks about the new feature, there is a documentation link right down here that goes directly to the documentation for that particular feature. And unfortunately, the documentation service never seems to remember my preference to use the dark theme, so I apologize if I blinded you with that. But if you look in the EC2 docs down here, we're under the user guide. If you go under Amazon Machine Images, if you go to allowed AMIs, or sorry, shared AMIs, and then allowed AMIs, that is where the documentation is for this particular feature. So I'm going to go ahead and close that sidebar so we have some more screen real estate here for this article. And I'll turn on focus mode there. Let's see, that gets rid of some of that upper creft right there that we don't really need. And I don't want that pop-up either. All right, so if we kind of read through here, basically what this does is it allows us to specify criteria. And at the moment, there's only one piece of criteria that you can specify, which is the AWS account ID or alias that you are authorizing images to be launched from. The way that this documentation reads, I could kind of predict. I'm not necessarily committing them to this, but hopefully in the future, they would actually give you additional criteria. Being able to look at different properties, like when was this AMI last updated, for example? Was it updated in the last 60 days, that kind of thing? So the way that this article reads in the documentation kind of leads you to believe that they might add more criteria in the future, but because it's kind of vague, I did want to let you know that as you continue to read through this article, the only currently supported criteria is to limit it by the AWS account ID. Now, there's a couple of different modes that you can put this feature in, and it is a per region feature. So if you take a look at this paragraph right down here, it says these settings must be configured in each AWS region, in each AWS account where you want to control the AMIs that are visible. So the way that I like to think about this is think about all the AMIs that are visible to an account, right? By default, you have the publicly available quick start images. You've got a whole bunch of historical images that are provided directly by AWS. You also have images that other accounts randomly out there have just kind of publicly shared with the public at large. They haven't shared it with specific account IDs. They've literally just made it globally available to any other account out there who wants to run that. And that could be leveraged by malicious users to make publicly available images that kind of have the appearance of being trustworthy, but actually have malicious software installed on them so that if you spin up an EC2 instance from that malicious AMI, you're actually deploying malicious software. And so we want to avoid that. We only want to launch images that we know are trustworthy, that our security team has actually validated are trustworthy, and we want to kind of reject all the other ones, right? So what we're doing is basically taking this huge repository of images that are available to us. We're putting a gate or a filter in front of it, and we're saying we're only going to let certain images pass through this filter so that we are locking down which images our account actually has access to. So what we can see down here is how it works. So basically what you do is you put together this little JSON policy blob right here, and you can apply this through APIs that are now available, or you can just apply this directly inside of the console. I'm going to show you how to do it through the console just for ease of navigation, but you can also apply this through policy as well. Basically, you have this image criteria property, which is an array, and you can have up to 10 objects like this with the image providers property on it. And then that image providers itself is an array of account IDs that you trust. Of course, there's some built-in aliases in AWS like Amazon and AWS Marketplace that you can also specify right there. But generally speaking, you're going to be providing the 12-digit account ID of the other account that you want to trust. So what this is, it's going to whitelist the AWS accounts that we are going to have visibility into. If you do not include Amazon or AWS Marketplace, then you're not going to be able to launch EC2 instances from the default images provided by AWS. So I just want to call that out, make sure you understand that. And what's kind of cool is that you can actually put this into audit mode before you actually commit the policy and enforce the policy so that you can validate ahead of time if a particular image is going to be allowed by this policy or not. So you can kind of do some automated testing using the APIs if you want to, or just inside of the console to determine if this policy that you create is going to impact the images that are available inside of the target AWS account where we're configuring this. All right, so let's talk about how to actually configure this. I'm just going to copy this little JSON policy blob right here. We're going to customize it inside of the console, but let's go ahead and actually enable this feature inside of one of our accounts. And before we actually do that, what we're going to do is build a image first. So let's go ahead and launch a new instance here. And if you already know how to do this, you can go ahead and skip ahead a little bit, but we're just going to call this Trevor01 image creation. We're going to use an Ubuntu base image here. We'll just use a Intel AMD 64-bit architecture here and use something like a T3 small instance type. Then we'll just choose an SSH key pair right here. We'll choose a VPC. Doesn't really matter as long as you have a VPC that has, public or private subnet. It's really up to you how you want to do this. But typically you'll have a default VPC in your environment. You'll have typically a public subnet so you can access it directly across the internet. I'm going to auto assign an IPv4 and IPv6 address so that I can SSH into it, do some updates, customization, whatever kind of customization you want to apply. I'll apply a security group that ensures I have SSH access to it. And then under advanced details down here, I typically like to enable an instance profile. That's not required, but it allows your server to register itself with the Systems Manager service using the Systems Manager agent that's pre-installed on the AWS provided AMIs. So I have a pre-built IAM role in the IAM service that I use to allow those permissions. But again, you don't have to worry about that generally speaking. I'm also going to choose spot instances down here because typically when you're doing development work like this or testing work, you don't really need to be paying full price, full on-demand hourly price for your instances. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose a one-time instance here. So once it's terminated, it's gone, or once it's shut down, terminated, it's just gone. That's not persistent. All right, so we'll go ahead and launch this instance. And then the only thing we're going to do really is to log into this instance. We're going to just do a apt-get update apt-get upgrade to update all of the base operating system packages that are pre-installed in Ubuntu Linux. And then we'll go ahead and create an AMI from it that we want to share with our other AWS account. So let me do SSH Ubuntu at, let's do a refresh here and grab the IPv6 address of our instance right here. And we'll just go ahead and paste that in. So we're going to SSH into this node. We'll do a typical sudo apt update, grab some metadata there, and then we'll do a sudo apt upgrade to update all of those base packages. We'll just give this a second to complete. And then after that, we're just going to take a snapshot using the AMI feature. So I'll do sudo apt upgrade -- yes. That'll take just a second to download all of the base packages and install them. Typically, it's pretty fast. Sometimes there's more updates to perform. It just kind of depends on how up to date the quick start images from AWS are. So once this is up to date, you can do any additional customizations that you want to before you actually package up your image. And then we're going to go over to the instance right here. You can right click on it, go to image, and then you can say create image from this instance. And then you can give the image a name. So let's just call it Trevor01-SG-YouTube, and we'll give it a description like AWS Quick Start Ubuntu 2404 LTS with all base package updates, and we'll give it a date like 2024-12/02. Actually, I think today might be the 3rd. And then we're going to uncheck reboot instance here because I created a spot instance, so I don't want it to reboot because that could potentially destroy the instance. And I don't really need to do anything else here. I could add some tags like maybe owner Trevor Sullivan, just in case somebody else comes across this. Hopefully it's visible from the name who owns this, but I'll just add in that owner tag as a good practice there for the rest of my teammates so that they know who created this image. All right, so now we're just going to wait for that to finish. All right, so we're back in kind of a stable state right here. I don't need that SSH session any longer, so we'll just click on Create Image. Now, the AWS platform here is automatically going to create a new AMI ID right away. The actual creation of the AMI may take a moment here. This is a pretty small instance because we're just using the default 8 GB volume. So it's not like a 500 GB volume or 10 terabyte volume or anything like that. So it doesn't have a lot of data. So hopefully it should act pretty quickly right here. So we'll just click on the AMI ID right there. So we can go over to the images screen. And if we check it out right here, hopefully everything should be good to go. So status is currently pending, and eventually that should finish up here. If I take off this filter right here, you can actually see that I created one just earlier today. Actually, so it is actually the 3rd. Sorry, I thought today was the 2nd of December. So this is actually 2 days ago that this feature came out. But I created this other image and it's in the available state. So once it switches from pending to available, that image will be available for deploying EC2 instances from. So now that we have created this image in the 9730 account right here, what I want to do is grab the account ID of the other account, which is right here, the 656. I'll just click on the copy button, and then we'll come back over here. And on this new image that we have created right here, we're going to right click on it, and we're going to say edit AMI permissions. And what you can do in here, if you're using AWS organizations, you can share it with your entire AWS organization. You can share it with a specific OU if you want to. That's kind of a separate topic, how organizations works. But again, I'm going to treat these like 2 standalone accounts right now, even though they're not. And so what I'm going to do is say, I want to share it with a specific account ID. So I'll say add account ID. We'll paste in that account ID and say share AMI. And then you want to make sure that you click on the Save Changes button right down here. Otherwise, that change will not be persisted. And as you can see right here, it says, hey, it failed because it's currently in the pending state. And so therefore we cannot share it out. So we'll just have to give this a moment to actually finish creating the image. But while that's finishing creation, if we head over to the other account, the one where the image was not created from, and then go down to AMIs, Normally, when you list out AMIs in the EC2 console here, you're going to see all these publicly available images from AWS or other random account IDs. There's a lot of cruft in here, right? And so when you're wanting to lock things down, you really want to focus on, hey, what are my images, right? Well, I don't have any images in this account in this region, right? So if I look at private images here, what it shows me is the image that I created earlier today because I've already shared that image in the available state with this AWS account. And you can see that the owner account ID right here is 9730. I'm currently in the 6546 account, but the 9730 account actually owns that image and shared it with me. So I didn't have to copy that image between different accounts or anything like that. I literally just created it in one account and then shared access to it. So it still has the same AMI ID across every account that it's shared with. It's just that I now have access to it from this account. So if I go over here to instances and I say, hey, I want to launch an instance, then I can go to browse more AMIs. And then what I can do is say, I want to look at my AMIs. And if I uncheck owned by me, because remember, this is not owned by the current account, it's shared with the current account. So I have to uncheck owned by me because me is the current account ID up here. And this is owned by the 9730 account. So when I uncheck owned by me, that becomes visible. Then we can select that image, right? So let's come back here. Let's try to save that change again. It looks like it's taken a little bit longer. So maybe we'll just go ahead and go through with the image that I already have accessible here. So I can actually launch an instance from this image. And this one happens to be ARM. So I'm going to use a T4G instead of a T3. I'll use a key pair right here. For my network settings, I'll choose my VPC, and I'm in a different account, so I have slightly different VPC configuration here, but I still have public subnets there. I'll choose a security group here, actually two of them, just to make sure I've got the SSH port in one of those. We'll use the default storage, go down to advanced details, and I'm going to skip the IAM instance profile, but I do want to select spot instance, customize, and we'll just make it a one-time instance. Okay, so we'll say launch instance. And as you can see, we were able to launch this instance just fine from that shared image, right? But now what we might want to do is say, well, I don't want people to be able to launch EC2 instances from all of these other images that are available, right? So if I say launch instance, I can see all these quick start images. If I go to browse more AMIs, I can look through all of these community public AMIs, and there's potentially a lot of malicious images out here. I don't know that for sure, but if you look through there, I would not be surprised if you found in the kind of publicly shared AMIs some malicious software. So what we want to do is basically say, well, because this is a corporate owned account, I'm going to only allow any images that are owned by this account over here, the 9730 account. I'm only going to allow those images to be launched inside of this region. So what we can do is come back to this account and go to the EC2 console. So you can just search for EC2 up here. We're already in the EC2 console. But if we go up to dashboard in EC2, and if you take a look at this little pane over here, it's called account attributes. And it's kind of hidden here. If you're not looking for it specifically, you might kind of miss it right here. It's called allowed AMIs. So we're going to choose allowed AMIs right there. And then you can see it takes us to the settings screen, and there's a bunch of different tabs here. So you can do things like enable availability zones. You can, set credit specifications for the burstable instance types, things of that nature. But allowed AMIs, this is a brand new feature. And by default, it's set to the disabled state, but we can put it into what's called audit mode. So it's not going to take effect until we actually change it to enabled. So for now, we're just going to put it into this audit mode. And this is going to allow us to determine if there are certain things that we want to make visible. This is going to allow us, to specify which AWS account IDs we want to allow images to be visible from. So you can see this JSON document that's been plugged in right here. This is basically customized already from the documentation right over here. So it's literally the same exact structure. It's just that 4 of the items have been removed and we replaced the first item with the account ID. that we want to allow. So that's fairly straightforward there. Simple JSON structure. It always pretty much has to follow the same structure. The only thing that you can really do is basically take this object right here and you can put a comma and then duplicate it again, and you can specify another account ID. So if I just change this number to something else, I could have that. Technically, this is a valid JSON structure. Also, I could take this second account ID and just put a comma up here. And oops, I thought I copied that. But let's just delete this here. Delete these lines here, remove the comma, and let's just copy this, bring it down here, and just change one of the numbers, and then remove that trailing comma there. So technically this is valid as well. You can have up to 10 of these objects inside here, and you can specify up to 200 accounts under the image provider's property. So hopefully with those limits in mind, there's enough opportunity for you to specify all the accounts that you want to allow EC2 images to be launched from. So then we'll click on the update button here. And so now we're in audit mode. I'm just going to remove the secondary account ID because I don't know whose that is. So I'll just specify the one account right over here. And so now if I go over to instances and say launch instance, you can see that I still have access to all of these images. And that's because we're in audit mode. We're not in the enabled mode that actually enforces that policy. So I still technically have full functionality that I was accustomed to before. So nobody's going to break any of their automations that they're deploying. But if I go over to images AMIs right here, and let me point you to where I'm talking about in the documentation. So in the documentation here, there's a section called identify AMIs that meet the allowed AMIs criteria. So these are basically, how do we identify which AMIs are going to pass through that filter, right? Which AMIs are we allowing to get through that filter that we have just specified? And so you can do it through the console or you can do it through the CLI. So you can specify a specific AMI ID that you want to check. And there's a property called allowed or image allowed right down here. It's just a Boolean property that's either true or false. And so that is one way to determine if a specific AMI ID is allowed or not. Or you can just go directly into the console. If you go under the AMI section, look at the details tab for an AMI, that's going to tell you if it passed the filter or not. And there really should only be, at this point, one image that actually passes the filter. Maybe a second if I can get this to save right here. So for whatever reason, it's taken a little bit longer for this image to get created here. So again, we're just going to stick with the one that I already have right here. Let me actually just do a quick refresh here on this image. So yeah, it's still sitting in the pending state for some reason. Not sure why it's taking so long to complete. All right, so back over here in our account that we're sharing with, this is the image that we have access to here. We saw that we could deploy from it. But now if we, let's say, go to public images, for example, you can see all these different images right here that are provided by either AWS Marketplace under the owner alias field right here or by Amazon. So if we search for, let's say, AMI name contains maybe Ubuntu, for example. So there's lots of different Ubuntu images here. I'm just going to pick kind of a random one right here. So let's pick this Ubuntu minimal one right here. If we take a look at the details for this one, which I'm not sure what happened to my details screen right down there. So let me just navigate away from that and navigate back to AMIs again. Actually, there's my details screen. All right. I want to uncheck all these. So uncheck. Let's select a specific one right here. So now we're on the details tab right here. And if we scroll down a little bit, you can see right over here, it says allowed image and it says no. And if we click on pretty much any of these, like here's a WordPress image from Bitnami, allowed is no. And so you can literally click on all these and it's going to say no, 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 because there's only one account that we are authorizing images from. And that is our account right over here. So if we click on private images, this is images that are set to private but are explicitly shared with this account, and I click on this image right here and go to the details tab and scroll down, allowed image is set to yes because this image that we just selected is owned by 9730 account, and that is in the policy over under dashboard account attributes, allowed AMIs, that is in this JSON policy. That 9730 account is the one that we specified right here. So again, this is a whitelist. This is very restrictive as far as which ones are going to be allowed or not. Now, in the audit mode, I can still go to launch instances and I can choose these quick start images to deploy from. It's not going to block me from doing that. But as soon as I put this into the enabled mode, that is when the blocking starts to actually occur. And it doesn't just block access to them to launch instances, it actually blocks it in the console as well, so that I can't even, when I go to launch instances, I can't even see those images in that quick start list where I typically would. So over in the dashboard view here, we're going to go ahead and select allowed AMIs again. We're going to say manage, we're going to do enabled and click update. Okay, so now we're in the enforcement mode. Of course, this is a development environment, so I'm not too worried about breaking anybody else at this time of the evening. And so if we come back to instances right here and say launch instance, check out what happens when this loads. So now on this quick start tab that's typically enabled by default, it says no quick start AMIs were returned because your account is restricted to your allowed images. And so if you click on browse more AMIs, check it out. Technically, there's 45 quick start AMIs out there, but we can't see any of them because we have that filter in place. Now, if I click on my AMIs, and again, we have to uncheck the owned by me attribute right here. Now we can see this 9730 AMI. So none of these other AMIs are going to be deployable except for this one that we have limited access to right here. So it does affect the user interface to an extent there. I don't know if I actually looked at the AMIs section right here. So if I try to select public images, as you can see, even when I go to public images with no filters enabled in the AMIs view right here, you can see that it even blocks access to see those AMIs in the console as well as through the API. I believe the documentation calls that out pretty explicitly, again, over here in the allowed AMIs documentation. So it is pretty restrictive. It's only going to allow images from this source account over here. Let's see if this other image is available yet that maybe we could share out. All right, looks like it is. So let's do a right click on this YouTube one and we'll say edit permissions, say add account ID, and we'll go ahead and paste in this account right here. Say share AMI, and we want to click save there as well. And then if we come back over to the other account, because both of those images are owned by the same AWS account ID, we don't have to change anything on the filter because the filter that we specified for allowed AMIs is all based on the owner account ID. So because both of those images are in the same region from the same account, we don't have to make any changes. And if we take a look at the private images that are visible, now you can see that we have two of these rather than just the one. So it is working properly here. That whitelist does work. If anybody else on your team gets confused, make sure that you communicate out exactly what this change is and how it works so that they know why some images that they may be accustomed to deploying from are no longer showing up. So make sure you have a good change management policy in place and make sure you have a communication as part of that change management policy to ensure that everybody knows as you're rolling out this change to your AWS environment that this is happening and these are the approved images and the specific IDs of those images that you should be using for various types of workloads. All right, so that's pretty much everything that I wanted to show. I just wanted to kind of demonstrate how you can take your own custom image and share it with a different account. Of course, that's been possible for a very long time now. But again, this new allowed AMIs feature just came out in the last couple of days here. And it's a very simple, just JSON governance policy that allows you to limit which AWS account IDs you specifically want to allow images to be deployed from. Now, you probably saw in the documentation that in the sample policy right up here, they did specify some of these owner aliases as well that are just built into the AWS platform. So what we could do is come back here and say image providers, and we could just do a comma and then say Amazon. And that's going to re-enable all of the images that we had in Quick Start but blocked access to. So let me copy this, say manage and update. And after updating that, we should be able to go back to instances. So now we should have access to the images from that one specific account ID that we shared. But you can see we also have access to these quick start images as well. But we've blocked access to a lot of things in Marketplace still, and all the public cruft out there that we don't really generally need access to except for development purposes. So this is a great security feature. It's really easy to use. It's something that I would encourage you to enable. Of course, our cloud engineering team would be more than happy to help you with that enablement and rollout as well. So if you're interested in a security governance project, we've done those types of things before, implementing AWS config rules, implementing security hub, guard duty, all those different types of things to really help kind of control your environment and have a better handle on what's being deployed inside your environment, and know that you're not just deploying a lot of cruft in there that's going to cost you extra money and potentially create security vulnerabilities. So thanks so much for joining us for this video. I hope that you learned something new from this video, and we'll see you in the next video. Feel free to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought of this video. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And be sure to check out all of our historical videos as well, because we've got a lot of great learning on the AWS platform. Thanks and take care.